Welcome to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. Matt Zemek with Ethan Inman and Crashlet Collier. No guesswork on what we're going to talk about tonight. The players coming, the players going, and the big story. Jayden Maiava is returning to USC for 2026. What that means for him, what it means for USC, what it means for Husan Longstreet. We're going to talk about it all here on the USC channel. And a reminder, go to vocfb.com/shop, get a nice snappy camo cap, or it can be a black cap as well. But if it's USC branded, proceeds go to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. Also go to our YouTube channel. You go to the homepage, USC at the Voice of College Football. You click the join button, go to the middle Heisman tier or the top national champion tier. You get an extended bonus segment with Cody Kessler. The three of us did that, and we've chopped out a number of other bonus segments. So those exclusive insider access bonus cuts for our members. So become a member, support the USC channel, get extended interviews with Cody Kessler. You can't get them anywhere else. You get it right here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. All right, so we're going to walk through this, right? Ethan, Crash, Maiava back, when we'll go through the list and all the other players, the things that you really find to be especially important with a lot of roster news for 2026. Ethan, get us started off.
Yeah, so with Maiava, I think that, that it was one that we were really waiting on, I think because it really determines a lot about the 2026 roster, and it also opens up a lot of questions. Like, obviously the natural one is, what does this mean for Husan Longstreet? What does this mean for Jonas Williams? What does this mean for USC's other quarterbacks just kind of coming down the pipeline? But I think that, I'm really excited to have Maiava back. He played really well this year. And I think that the main thing that gets me excited about having Maiava back is that, he improved so much over the course of this offseason compared to how good he was in 2024. So that just kind of has me dreaming about, with another full offseason under his belt, what he could accomplish and the kind of player that he could become. So that's really exciting to me. And then I think, it also kind of sends a message in a sense. I think that, Maiava could have gone to the NFL and he probably would have been drafted because, I wrote about the Trojans Wire and I brought up a Mel Kiper big board where I think, Maiava was in the top 10 ranked of quarterback prospects, which means he would have gotten drafted. May not have necessarily been super high, but he definitely would have got selected. And I just think that, there's in this day and age, you see a lot of players taking their immediate, opportunity at the NFL because you never know, what could happen in another year in college in terms of injuries and performance and all that kind of stuff. So it's a bit of a risk for Maiava to stay in some sense. I'm sure he would have also had plenty of offers in the transfer portal had he decided to go that route, especially from great teams that, could potentially be in the college football playoff have a little bit of a better, stronger case for the college football playoff next year than USC does right now. Namely teams that are already in the CFP this year. But, he didn't do any of that. He didn't leave. He stuck with USC. He bought in. And, if there are any other players that are on the fence, it really shows a lot of belief and it shows a lot of like, hey, we're looking to compete in 2026. And there's, something special about staying here and there's something that makes it worth it. So I think that, that message is something that USC fans should be really excited about for sure.
Well, I look at this move as I think it's a big statement from USC saying, look, it really, I think for Lincoln Riley, I think it's a big win too, because I'm not trying to knock against Miller Moss, but Miller Moss, I don't think lived up to the potential I think fans were hoping he would, especially given how his first two starts at USC went. The Holiday Bowl against Louisville and then the game in Vegas against LSU. It led fans thinking, okay, he's right up there with, maybe not right up there with Caleb, but capable of contending for a Heisman kind of level. And what does that say about the season? But that didn't really happen. And ultimately Moss, didn't really work out, ultimately decided to transfer to Louisville. And then Jayden Maiava gets his chance. Mayav obviously comes in. Obviously, I think he's a little shaky, but then I think really with that year under his belt, it sounds like he really developed into a leader and like someone like, the team really like rallied around. I think especially once, it was clear he was going to be coming back and going to be the guy for USC. So I think really him coming back this year, I think solidifies that, especially with how he played, took a lot of steps forward this year. So really excited to see him come back. And like when I saw that this morning, like right before I hit the gym, I was super excited, but it also had me thinking, all right, what's going to happen with Hassan Longstreet though? And I don't really know how well like he knows like just everything in Longstreet's circle, but I know someone who like coached him a little bit in high school. So I just casually asked someone I knew at the gym today, do you know anything about what's going on with Hassan now that Jaden Mayav signed? He's like, I hope he stays, but I don't know what he's going to do. So I'm not going to reveal anything further than that because I don't really, but it was just definitely like, interesting conversation I had, especially with Mayava, with USC announcing that Mayava is coming back for one more year. So it's definitely, I think it's going to be interesting. Like we're probably going to discuss about what's going to happen with this QB room now that Jade Mayava has announced that he's back and what everybody else is going to do.
Ethan, the Crash just kind of segued from Mayava into Longstreet. So your Longstreet take.
Yeah, I think that to me, based on what I saw from Hassan Longstreet this year, I think that if I'm USC, I'm willing to take the risk that Longstreet leaves and still heavily pursuing Mayava anyway. That's evidently the route that they took. Unless they already had Hassan Longstreet's commitment in their back pocket, which it doesn't seem like they did because they haven't announced it yet. So to me, it seems like that's kind of what they did. And that's what I would do as well. I just think that, based on what I saw from his play, like he was still a bit raw this year. I think that he has a lot of potential. But I think that, and I don't think that USC right now is playing scared in terms of their ability to acquire talent. Like I think that the 2026 recruiting class really shows that they have kind of that on lock, at least for now. And, I think Chad Bowden's done a really good job as GM. And that, I think that there's a lot of confidence that they are going to do well in this transfer portal based just on how they've kind of come across and how they've communicated. I think there's a lot of confidence that they're going to do well in next year's recruiting class as well. So I think that, I think that Mayava represents like a sure bet. And, you don't often get those in college football. And so I just think that like, you can't like get so caught up in what could be and sacrifice what you have. It's kind of like, in baseball, trading prospects for established stars. Like, yeah, you could, and this is in this sense, like if you lose Longstreet and you keep Mayava, you're essentially like losing one prospect for one established star. And like in baseball, that'd be a pretty good trade. Like usually if you're going to give up an established star, you bring in multiple top prospects to replace them. So I don't know. I think that it's part of the calculus. I still really hope he stays. And, I think that though it's rare, there is precedent in the modern game of players kind of staying and developing despite being stars and, despite the fact that they could play elsewhere. But I wouldn't blame him if he left either, because he does have a lot of talent and he could play on a lot of teams. So I guess we'll see what happens with that.
So Crash, in terms of the follow-up, because you did talk a little bit about Longstreet, like how much of a gut punch would it be if Longstreet leaves? Ethan kind of walked through the various tension points, but the price of Longstreet leaving could be, or the benefit of Longstreet leaving could be that Mayava stays and gives USC a knockout 2026 season. We all hope he stays, but how much of a loss would it be if, and we're just speculating, this purely hypothetical, none of us are predicting anything here, but just how much of a loss for you would it be if Longstreat leaves?
Well, Matt, I think based on how we saw Longstreat play this year, could he possibly be played more? They were able to preserve his red shirt. We were all wondering at the way they were playing him, would he even keep it? We were thinking, all right, at this point, screw it, just burn it, whatever, right? But they actually kept his red shirt, so he's still got 4 years of eligibility left in his collegiate career. That said, though, I think I could see this going either way, where he takes another year to develop, and then it's him versus Jonas Williams for that QB battle in 2027. Or if he leaves and tries to compete for a spot and probably forces Lincoln Riley to have to go find another quarterback in the transfer portal, that probably is going to then position Williams to come in and really assume the starting role. So really, I think when you look at once Maeva announced he was coming back, then the decision falls to Longstreet, where he's got to decide, do I try to, get to be developed for another year and then get to be the guy? Kind of like I think what Arch Manning did at Texas for 2 years under Quinn Ewers, or do I try to play now and then play? But then USC's then left in a tricky spot where they're going to be starting a guy who's only really gotten be in the program for 1 year as a sophomore, potentially redshirt freshman in his second year of college. So I'm more interested in what's the 2027 battle QB situation going to look like because of Maeva staying. I'm more looking at the future implications beyond that, because clearly Maeva is going to be the guy next year. That's pretty certain. So the question is, does Longstreet want to try to battle out Williams, or is he just going to try to go play now, and then Williams, assuming, everything goes right, gets to then step up into that starting role as presumably a redshirt sophomore in 2027?
All right, I'm going to weigh in with my view of this. It's impossible to ignore what's happening at Indiana, that Indiana and Cignetti are in on the top transfers at quarterback for 2026 to replace Fernando Mendoza. Indiana's reputation has become so good so quickly that Cignetti is in a position to get the pick of the litter. And so I mentioned that because USC and Lincoln Riley should be able to get the pick of the litter at quarterback in 2027 if they need to fill that vacancy, and especially if Jaden Maeva delivers a world-class 2026 season. Like, USC and Chad Bowden should have zero problem getting a prime veteran ready to play quarterback in 2027. Now, I would love for Husan Longstreet to stay. It would be like a Dante Moore type situation where you wait your turn, but then you're given the keys to the offense when it's your time, and then you get to drive the Lamborghini. But if he leaves, I think USC is definitely in a position to land a premier transfer quarterback in 2027. Chad Bowden's skill and expertise at acquiring players, I think that gives me a lot of confidence that if Longstreet leaves, USC can just fill in. USC can acquire the quarterback it needs for 2027. The other thing that needs to be said about Longstreet, because I didn't spend time pounding on this during the season, but they used him terribly. Let's be honest.
Agreed.
One play against Illinois, I think there was 1 or 2 plays in another game. Like, if you're gonna give him those bites of the apple, you need to be playing him, meaningful snaps. You need to be giving him like 7 to 10 snaps in a game. I mean, maybe not high leverage situations, but you give him a chance to really show off his skill. To put him in for just 1 or 2 plays in multiple games, that was malpractice, and it's what made me think they were going to burn his red shirt. Of course, they're going to play him late in the season. Like, you need to get a look at this guy, much as Lincoln Riley needed to get a look at Maeva late in the 2024 season, playing him those games late, and playing Maeva in those November games and the bowl game in 2024, that helped his development, that helped his progression for 2025. I'm sure that he wouldn't have come as far as he did if he didn't get those meaningful reps. So Husan Longstreet was deprived of those meaningful reps, and that absolutely has to be said. Hopefully, it doesn't cost USC Husan Longstreet. All right, so that's the quarterback room, and we can kick that around in the next 8.5 months, right? There's so much more that can be said, but that's our initial overview of the quarterback room. So Ethan, Crash, let's now move on. The other high profile, and it's interesting. And Ethan, you wrote about this. USC is making a big deal about re-signing players. Like that is the new vernacular. That's the new reality of the NIL world. You need to re-recruit and repay, re-sign your own players. So Ethan, talk about just the larger process of re-signing and also other real high-profile names that you're especially glad are coming back to USC for 2026.
Yeah, I don't really mind it. I think that there's been a lot of negative coverage of the whole situation on maybe not coverage, but just reaction to the whole situation on social media. A lot of people are like, oh, we're using the term re-signing now. What does our great sport become? Blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't know. I think it's the era we're in. I think that, as soon as you kind of opened the can of worms of paying players, this was kind of inevitable. I could it still be reworked a little bit better to maybe where, you're signing players to longer contracts or, including the bowl game in certain contracts. So you don't have all these bowl game opt-outs. I think it could. But I think that getting mad at USC for being ahead of the curve is a little weird because like this is the era we're in. It's not like, USC is the only one re-signing its players to new contracts every year and nobody else is. Like everybody's doing it. It's just that USC isn't being really shy about it. And I like as a fan, I kind of am enjoying it actually because it like allows me to get excited about seeing each guy's, kind of development next season. Like, especially because a lot of the guys that they've announced so far are all guys that, were meaningful contributors on this team in 2025, besides a couple of guys who were hurt, but, on paper would have been meaningful contributors in 2025 and should be meaningful contributors in 2026. So, in terms of guys that I'm the most excited about returning, like I said, everybody who's been announced so far was a meaningful contributor. But my top like 2 or 3, definitely Prophet Brown is up there just because, I'm really happy for him that he got his medical red shirt. I think that having a veteran at corner is going to be so essential. And just losing to Carlos Nicholson and how this year went with, all the young corners. Having him back and healthy and hopefully playing at 100% is something that really excites me. And then the receivers, they got Tanook Hines to stay, which I don't think was too big of a surprise. Then they also announced that Zacharias Williams was going to stay, which was one of the guys that I kind of had my eye on because I, wasn't 100% sure how he was going to feel about how the season went because, he was hurt for a lot of it, but he was also kind of a non-factor when he did play. And, kind of coming into the season, people were really high on him because he was just he had a lot of promise at Utah and a lot of people thought he was going to be the number 1 receiver at Utah. So for him to come in and be, relegated to a relative non-factor and kind of surpassed by Tanook Hines on the depth chart, even when he did play, kind of raised some eyebrows for me. So I was curious how he was going to react to that, but, good on him for locking in, being competitive and sticking around and seeing it through. And he's a guy with a lot of talent. So, and I think when you're replacing Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, you're going to need as much talent in that receiver room as you can get. So those are like the few top guys. Obviously, like I said, everybody they've announced so far has a lot of potential or is a really good player and has contributed a lot at this point. So, but those are the I think the most important for sure.
So I do want to talk about a few things. I did see a few things of like people kind of really like upset about it. The one I saw actually earlier today was Joel Klatt talking about on his show, the Joel Klatt show, about just how he doesn't really like the idea of like, oh, now suddenly everyone's a free agent every year. Well, it's kind of the reality we're in. But the thing I think actually as a fan, I actually like it because yeah, is it kind of weird that, you got to, hear, the players that you care about on your team each year, like now have to get an official graphic on the football team's Instagram page so they're staying? Honestly, I have no problem with it. And really, it just assures fans, like, because obviously a couple of guys I was excited about that first come to mind, I'll go more in depth in a sec, like Wayman Jordan and Killian O'Connor coming back, were two guys I was super hyped on them coming back, and just knowing that it's like, all right, this is like official, it's coming from the USC football Instagram account, completely validates it. And then I'm not wondering, all right, what's Waymo doing? All right, Killian, is he gonna try to go pro? Is he coming back? Like, you know exactly what those guys are doing. So I honestly like it. And then one other thing I did want to clarify, I saw earlier. So Stuart Mandel at The Athletic was like, retweeted, I think, the Mayava graphic on X saying, so apparently we're doing this now. Ryan Darude of LAFB Network responded with, retweeted it saying, it's funny how much hate this is getting nationally. Even before the NIL era, players had to re-sign their scholarship offers for a new year. USC is just leaning into now and treating it more like a professional environment, which is pretty cool for players. But then I also thought, which also I think was another interesting thing I saw about exactly what's going into it, is Cody Warsham responded to that comment saying, to be specific, they are now signing NIL licensing agreements, which is new and informed our strategy. So I think I think what's interesting that's come out of it is exactly what the players are signing. Cody Warsham, I think, did a great job really offering some insight into what exactly it is players are signing. And two, going back to my original point, it just lets fans know this guy's coming back. Like, and especially if that's, a guy fans really liked, you get hyped up for it, like I said. And that kind of leads me to like kind of guys I'm excited about coming back. Obviously, Taduk Hines coming back, I think he could really step up and potentially be the wide receiver one. Like I said, Wayman Jordan coming back, I think especially with just how well he played before he got injured. Killian O'Connor. And then another guy also too is just Justin Taonu. And I just really like just, these two guys on the offensive line, O'Connor and Taonu, because of just how well they did this year, just really doing a great job of protecting Mayava. So those are kind of the guys that I'm excited to have seen graphics for. And something that, like I've said already a few times, I'm very excited about.
One of the things that occurs to me in terms of looking at the list of re-signed players who, veterans returning for next season, you don't find many on the defensive line, right? You have some receivers, running backs, Mayava, Killian O'Connor, Waymo. Defensive line is kind of conspicuously absent, and I think, Ethan and Crash, that reinforces the point that this has to be where Chad Bowden makes his splashes in the portal. That, you want to see splashes everywhere, but if they really are to happen in January, defensive line is where Chad Bowden needs to go to Whole Foods and get those high-end groceries. Ethan, Crash.
Yeah, I think, Braylon Shelby is really the only defensive lineman that I've seen them officially announce. And he was the second guy after Wayman Jordan. So, honestly, he kind of was the most productive defensive lineman, or one of them at least. He was at least, USC had trouble getting to the quarterback all year, but I believe he led the team in sacks. I'm not 100% sure on that. You have to fact check me. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think, it will be interesting to see how they can, who they continue to announce in the coming days. But regardless, I think you've got to hit the portal and bring in some competition because, you can't exactly run it back with the same unit and expect them to do, 10 times better than they did this year. Competition is always a good thing. And I think that, defensive line is one of the units too, where just depth is always helpful and important. So yeah, regardless, they're definitely going to be hitting the portal hard for sure.
Okay. Before I let Crash tackle this, Ethan, let me just follow up. Is USC in a position where you want to bring in defensive line competition or where you bring in your ones? Like, there are two different philosophies there. Competition and create a camp battle, or no, we want to get a starter quality, no questions asked player. So how would you kind of deal with that particular tension point?
I think you approach it like you're getting your ones. But I think you also leave yourself open to the idea of it becoming a competition in case the guys who are already there, kind of play up to their potential. But I think anytime I don't think that anytime you kind of acquire, anytime you're unsatisfied with the way a position is played and you're looking to acquire someone in the transfer portal, I think it'd be kind of silly to look at it like, oh yeah, let's get more replacement level players. Like, I think you want to get players that you believe can be a starter. And then, if someone else on your team proves that they deserve that starting role more, then you adjust. But I think, yeah, approaching it like you're getting your ones is absolutely the way to go.
Over to you, Crash.
I agree with that philosophy. You got to try to get the guy you think, but for whatever reason, if you don't if that transfer doesn't hit or just someone steps up, like, you got to be ready to pivot, I think. So I think Ethan absolutely nailed it. I mean, case in point, favorite example was Killian O'Connor beating out Jeremy Reed. Yes, this is on the offensive side of the ball, but the same idea. My understanding was Reed was brought in specifically for that job, but Killian O'Connor beats him out. So I think it's, if someone can I think you want to try to get that guy, but you definitely don't want them to just be thinking, all right, this job's mine. You got to have someone who's on their back. It's like, all right, if you aren't living up to it, I'm going to go out there and take this job from you. You want someone on them, no matter how good they are, who's ready to take their job, even if it is someone who's holding over and understands that playing is probably a long shot.
All right. Any other re-signings that you want to talk about? Any other re-signings that you feel notable? And if there aren't, other players that you think USC really needs to re-sign and retain for 2026? Ethan, then Crash.
Yeah, I think that I'm excited to see Ryan Sayuri officially back. I think back to the beginning of the season when I wasn't even sure if Sayuri was going to finish out the year, and it was like game 4, and I was like, maybe you keep playing Sayuri even if Caden Chittenden gets healthy. And they have stuck to Sayuri, and I think rightfully so. So I'm excited to see him back. And then I think as well, the defensive side of the ball obviously underperformed this year, but I think that the players that they're bringing back so far on that side of the ball have me pretty excited about how they could grow this offseason. Christian Pierce, Jaden Walker, Marcellus Williams in particular. I think that, they weren't consistent, but I think consistency usually comes with experience. And so I'm really hoping that I have a lot of, I'm not necessarily 100% confident in those players, but I have a lot of hope that, this offseason could really do them some benefit. In terms of guys who they haven't re-signed yet that they really need to, I think, Walker Lyons definitely comes to mind. I saw him mentioned in the chat earlier. You have Mark Bowman coming in, but I think that the tight end room was so deadly this year because you had 2 guys who were just so good. So I would love to see him back. I think, haven't seen any official announcement that King Miller's returning, which, he's also not a scholarship player. So the longer that goes on, the more I just get a little unsettled about how, if there are any complications with that. Like I want to see, King Miller on scholarship as soon as possible, and also, his re-signing announced as soon as possible. I think they need to keep filling out the offensive line for sure. O'Connor and Taunu'u are a nice start, but I think you want as many linemen because, there's no guys currently who, are like locks to graduate or, go to the NFL draft. So I think, like Elijah Page, Tobias Raymond, those kind of guys, like I would hope that they could get them back, and we'll announce that as soon as possible. That's kind of the main ones for me. I think, you'll notice most of them were on the offensive side of the ball because the offensive side of the ball was so good this year. And, I think the defense could afford to go through some turnover. And second of all, like if it does go through some turnover, I'm not going to overly panic because I think that, like I said, a lot of the defensive players with promise, they've already kind of re-signed. There's a lot of good defensive players coming in the recruiting class, and I'm hopeful that they'll get a lot of them in the portal as well. So, I think those are the main ones to me: tight end, King Miller, and then getting some offensive linemen in the room as well.
Well, I think we'll know if King Miller's coming back because they will probably post a hype video on Instagram of him getting absolutely moshed when Lincoln Riley announces him getting a scholarship, which he absolutely should. The other guy, I think, is Ethan. You kind of covered a lot of guys that I had in mind. Not trying to take anything away from you, but I think another guy that comes to mind, speaking of King Miller, is his brother Kalon Miller, who I think did a great job filling in at offensive line as guys went down. So hopefully Kalon also, I think, deserves a scholarship too, especially with just how critical that offensive line was and how well not just him, but the entire line played this year in protecting Mayava. So I think Kalon Miller is a guy that I want to also see a hype video and a graphic for. And then also just, like Tanu Hines, that's a big one. All those defensive guys that have been mentioned, Sayeri. I mean, now I'm curious. I mean, I haven't seen anything yet, but that's making me wonder what's going to happen with Caden Chittenden if he decides to leave, especially because he was kind of really brought in for that job based on my understanding. So I'm really going to be interested to see. Oh, yes, defendant fanatic. Sorry, I couldn't help but laugh when you brought that one up. But yes, I'm wondering what Caden Chittenden does, if they'll need, someone else in the place kicking room. I think another area we'll have to see, I want to see somewhere on the special teams. I think that's an area where definitely I think there might be a bit of an overhaul. I mean, just the question of Ryan Dutry, does he stay? I mean, they definitely need another punter because definitely near the end, the special teams were egregious. I think we can all agree on that, especially as Dutry's name joined our, our voice of college football hot seat room along with none other than Rob Ryan. So I think really it's like kind of special teams, then really defense. And I'm obviously interested to see how Carrington Pierce, the transfer who's committed from Oklahoma State, does in the secondary. And then obviously I do want to see kind of that secondary filled out. So really those are kind of like the defense and kind of that defense, linebacker, really all of defense. And then I think special teams are areas I really want to see USC really, really attack hard, as we've been saying.
All right, so we're continuing to talk about the 2026 roster, but now we pivot to the other side, not the players who've been retained, but the players who are declaring for the NFL draft or who are exiting via the transfer portal. So some big names involved here. Ethan and Crash, your overview of players who are leaving the program, any surprises, any kinds of examples of players who you thought, maybe this is a 50-50 ball, but they wind up either going to the NFL or transferring? Ethan, then Crash.
I think I was kind of interested to see Kamari Ramsey, leave. I think it's just he's an NFL caliber player and he's going to get drafted really highly. I just think like momentum is something that kind of matters. And I think it's really interesting to see him like go from having a really great year in not that he had a horrible year this year. He was still a very impactful player who, kind of stepped in and was the glue holding together the secondary because, we didn't really have any healthy players who could step in and play nickel at a collegiate level. But like he was certainly more impactful on the field in 2025 or in 2024 than he was in 2025. So I kind of wondered if maybe he would stick around another year just to kind of have, wait for USC to like find a nickel that actually can like serviceably play the position so he can move back to safety full time and have kind of another home record year. But I don't fault him. Like I said, he's probably going to get drafted really high anyway. The kind of swing in momentum, it wasn't enough to kill his draft stock. But I'd kind of hoped he would stay and was a little bummed that he left. It's a lot of people I think were upset about Jacoby Lane, and I not in like in a way that they were mad at Jacoby Lane, but just in the sense that like they figured he could stay, and then now they're sad that he left. I kind of always saw Jacoby Lane leaving. I don't think I ever really expected him to stay. I think that he is just too talented and too clearly a fit for the NFL and a lot of NFL teams at this point already. That there's not really much I think that he could have gained from another year at USC. I think, in terms of transfers, I think we hit on most of them last week. Prince Strawn leaving is also pretty expected in my opinion, just because he kind of, fell out of having a role on this team. It is something to monitor though, because like I said, the wide receiver room is something you have to pay a lot of attention to with Mekhi and Jacoby leaving. I think that USC will probably bring in a transfer to a wide receiver, but because I think there's just too many question marks. And again, wide receiver is another room where I think depth and competition are always a positive thing. So, that's kind of how I feel about those few guys.
Yeah, so I think obviously Lake McCree, we knew he was leaving. He was out of eligibility. Kamari Ramsey, I guess I can see it, but it's like you said, Ethan, he didn't really have the momentum. And we all thought last year he was going to leave when he had all the momentum. Like that seemed like maybe, I think he'll probably still get drafted pretty high, but he probably hurt his chances a little bit just because he regressed a little bit. He took that risk, but still, we'll see where he goes. And then, like you said, Jacoby Lane, I think it was to be expected. Obviously, he was the 1B guy, but still had a really great year, especially after coming back. And I remember there was some speculation about that given everything that happened last year, but it just made sense he was going to come back for one more year. And then based on the year he had, it just made sense that he was going to leave. And I think just really for him, it's like, yeah, I'm bummed to see him leave. I can see why fans are upset in that regard, not because he's going to go on and have more professional success, which he absolutely, I think, will. But just because he's leaving USC, but I think it's like, you know what? All of us as USC fans just owe Jacoby Lane just a big thank you for the last few years of just what he's been able to do and just how fun he was to just watch out there on the field every Saturday. So I think that one, and then really just kind of name that caught my eye of like guys leaving via the portal that sort of caught my eye was Harry Dalton II. But kind of not surprising. I know they're saying, oh, maybe he'll get to play. But then I think with Waymo announcing he was coming back, Waymo coming back and King Miller just breaking out the way he did, it does not surprise me that Dalton is leaving as well. So really, I think it was kind of clear that that's how the running back room was going to shape up for next year, assuming Waymo came back. Eli Sanders is also out of eligibility. So once Waymo came back, it was kind of not surprised to see Dalton follow Brian Jackson out the door as well.
So, we've talked about retaining players. We talked about players declaring for the NFL. We talked about players leaving for the portal. So, a lot of revolving doors here, in and out, the roster being remade in real time before our eyes over the past few weeks. I think every USC fan would agree that defensive line is the number one position group in the portal. My question for you is, what's the second most important position group after all of these reshufflings and we begin to get that picture of who's coming back, who's not, and how the roster and its holes and its strengths looks different? What's the second, and let's also do third, position groups of need behind defensive line in the January portal? Ethan, then Crash.
I think second, I'd put safety, just because I think you're losing Bishop Fitzgerald and losing Kamari Ramsey. You're losing, ultimately your two best safeties. I like Christian Pierce a lot. And, it's kind of cool now that his brother Carrington Pierce is also going to be attending USC. Having two brothers on the same team to go along with King Miller and Kalon Miller. It's always cool to have those connections. But I think, we kind of saw the duo of him and Kennedy Urlacher the last few games of the year. And like I said, they're real fun players. They're real hard-hitting players. But I don't feel supremely confident in both of them becoming, well-rounded starting safeties at this point. So I just think that there's not enough consistency there. And maybe they do, and maybe the guy you bring in the portal is reserved to a backup role. But I think kind of like I mentioned about the defensive line, I think you have to kind of bring in your ones, and then if the guys you have prove to be your ones, then so be it. But I think that a more established, more kind of talent, I don't know the word I'm looking for. Just like a more consistent veteran player would be really good at safety. And then I think number 3 is probably wide receiver, just because, Tanook Hines is really good. I have a lot of hope for Zacharias Williams, but I think that there's a lot of question marks beyond that. And so, you need at least 3 wide receivers you can count on to be starting guys. And then, beyond that, of course, wide receiver depth is always very important. And, do we even know that Tanook Hines can carry the load? Do we know that Zacharias Williams will come back fully healthy? There's just too many question marks. So I think going and getting at least one guy that you can plug and play as a starter on day one, wide receiver, will be really important.
So I think honestly, after a defensive line, I think really I want to see just a linebacker room. I think it might be my second priority. Actually, no. I think offensive line is my number 2 priority. I think even though I'm confident in the guys who are coming back, there's still going to be a couple crucial vacancies that USC does need to fill. So I really think that's an important one, especially because of how it allowed USC to really, for the most part, compete with the best teams, really play Big Ten, big boy football, and then also really allow just Jaden Mayava to have the protection he needed, and then King Miller especially to really be able to thrive in the backfield and really be able to find holes and break through whenever he had the ball. And then I think after that, would be a linebacker, just because of you're losing Eric Gentry, someone who's really, really versatile player. And I think just honestly, I think especially with just, how where our confidence stands with Rob Ryan and that not being very high at all, I think that's an area, especially because we're going to need to get good players, because they're going to have to rely on their natural talent, I think, and just there's not going to be as much really, I think, coaching to help them to really be able to develop. So you're going to need guys there who are just really able to just plug in and be able to, stop the run should it get past the defensive line and not let them get into the secondary and just have these big explosive plays that then just, allow teams to just, really just put USC's defense in danger and have to force Jaden Mayava and the offense, put the game on their back.
Yeah, I want to step in on this one as well. And I would really reiterate Crash's comments about linebacker. If Rob Ryan's coming back, so that, to me, it's, the players who were at linebacker. If Rob Ryan's being retained, right, the message that's being sent is the players weren't good enough. If Rob Ryan was fired, that would be a verdict saying the coaching wasn't good enough. So if the players weren't good enough, well, you need to get better players and you need to get veteran, proven linebackers who can step right in and make a significant impact and take the pressure off Rob Ryan to have to fit him into Danton Lynn's scheme. So linebacker would be my third one, but my second one would be wide receiver. You're not losing one dude, one stud. You're losing 2 of them. And because Jaden Mayava is coming back, we're in a 2023 situation here where you don't want to squander your elite quarterback's final year with your program. USC squandered Caleb Williams' final season. You need to give him the best. You need to give him elite weapons. And so Tanook Hines is not going to be next year what Mekhi Lemon was. He's not going to be a Biletnikoff Award contender. Let's just be real about that. So you need your Jordan Addison. And I would reiterate that after Jordan Addison, USC has not had a great track record of bringing in the top receiver who hits. Dorian Singer. It just turns my stomach, contemplating how much of a bust he was. And yet, he torched USC head to head. And, the story is Caleb Williams turned to Lincoln Riley. Hey, can we get that guy? Well, they brought him in and he didn't do anything. So it's time for USC to get an aircraft carrier on par with Jordan Addison in the portal. We saw how much Jordan Addison reshaped the field for USC in 2022. No reason Chad Bowden can't go out and get a dude on that scale with that level of productivity. And that's what Jaden Mayava not only needs, but deserves for his loyalty to USC, coming back one more year. So I would say wide receiver is the top non-defensive line position group of need in the portal, and then linebacker close behind. Offensive line is interesting. I think that's where you try and get depth pieces because Zach Hansen's been so good at developing guys. See, that's kind of the opposite of Rob Ryan at linebacker. If you have a coach that you know is going to hit home runs with player development, you can recruit depth pieces because he's going to develop them, and you can just have an army of, not rock stars, but you have an army of dependable guys. But for the coach whose player development chops you're not sure about, that's where you need to get the rock star. That's where you need to get the guy with a cape on his back and an S on his chest. So that's a little bit of context in terms of the position groups other than defensive line, where USC really needs to thrive. All right, we have plenty more coming your way. We asked at the beginning of the show, to send us some questions. So, Dependent Fanatic, do you believe Lincoln Riley can keep improving at USC on the defensive side? Also, who should coach Michigan? Ethan, Crash.
Yeah, I think that I've kind of been an advocate in terms of, Lincoln Riley and the defensive side of the ball, of Lincoln Riley sort of taking the Kyle Shanahan approach and really just kind of nailing all of his defensive staff hires, and just kind of running it as like a 1A, 1B situation where, like, Lincoln Riley doesn't necessarily have to be really great at coaching defense or, as long as he kind of nails the guys on the other side of the ball. And the story has been that, his hires have been pretty poor. You look at Brent Venables at Oklahoma, and, Oklahoma doesn't have an elite offense this year, but, they have an offense that did the job, and the offensive coordinator that they hired also brought over John Mateer. So, it ended up being kind of a win of a hire in a lot of ways, and it got them to the college football playoff. Again, I'm sure Oklahoma fans wish that, their offense was even better, and I'm sure that they miss at least a little bit the days of, their quarterbacks winning Heisman every year and scoring 45 points every game, because it is exciting. But I think that they'll take college football playoff appearances any year, especially when USC is not getting there. So I think that Lincoln needs to nail his hires, which he hasn't done, and I am afraid that they're letting a couple of people stay on the defensive staff this year that shouldn't, and I'm afraid that he kind of lacks that kind of natural skill of being able to get the best out of his defensive staff and hold them accountable. So, but do I believe? Yeah, I still do have a little bit of hope. In terms of who Michigan should get for head coach, I saw someone say Kyle Whittingham earlier. I hope they don't get Kyle Whittingham because, Kyle Whittingham's an incredible football coach, and I think that would put USC in trouble. I really don't want to have to play Kyle Whittingham again on a regular basis. I hope that Kyle Whittingham is serious about retiring and does not come back to coach football anymore for any team that USC is going to play anytime in the near future. But in terms of like who would be best for Michigan, I think Kyle Whittingham is the clear answer. I think, Bryant Haynes was a guy that I brought up initially, but he just signed a big extension with Indiana, so you're not really going to get him. I'd look around the league at some other big defensive coordinators. I don't think you poach Matt Patricia from Ohio State, but maybe you call him. I think that it's worth a shot. I don't know. I think defensive coordinator is where I'd look generally, and Kyle Whittingham would be my top option.
Okay, before Crash jumps in with his answer, Ethan, you said something very eye-opening. There are a couple coaches on that defensive staff that you don't think are cutting it. So who's the non-Rob Ryan guy?
I just think that, I don't think that I would say Eric Henderson did a great job. I don't think that, I think there's just no defensive staffer that I would say had kind of a home run of a year. I can't really hold this year against Doug Belk because just of how little he was working with and like how the staff kind of improved, or how the secondary kind of improved as the year went on. But I don't know. I can't really sit here and say that I can't, and there were games where I was frustrated with Danton Lynn even. I think that, some of his defensive play calling and scheming was kind of really hair pulling at times. When it was clear that, USC needed to be more aggressive, especially. So, I just don't think that any USC defensive coach from this past year should be sitting and, feel satisfied with their performance. So that's kind of where that comment came from, I suppose.
Okay. Just wanted to get some clarity there. I'm sure fans' ears perked up a little. All right, Crash, tackle these questions from Dependent Fanatic.
So I'm going to actually start with the Michigan question just because, Ethan, you brought up Kyle Whittingham. And I actually saw John Canzano wrote today, actually, that he doesn't think that's going to happen. And it sounds like this is what he wrote in his column today. So you can read him at johncanzano.com. He just said, people keep asking me if Utah coach Kyle Whittingham, and I quote, people keep asking me if Utah coach Kyle Whittingham would pop up as a candidate at Michigan. Not happening. His retirement is actually a retirement. Whittingham's last contract extension at Utah didn't just include a raise. It got him $1 million retirement bonus and a promise of free tuition for his grandchildren. So I'm going to take that as word that I think Whittingham's out. And I know they're saying, oh, it was a step down, but I think that clarified. It really didn't make sense he was going to go anywhere else. He just seems like he was just ready to, just take an ambassador role at Utah. Just, pay special assistant to the AD or whatever they do. So I don't really know who they're going to go with. I mean, I keep seeing candidates. I saw some that Eli Drinkwitz, but he signed an extension. They're saying Kalen DeBoer. I don't see DeBoer leaving. So I really don't know what way they're going to go with this search, especially because of how late they fired Sharon Moore. And I mean, if we learned anything from how that Penn State search went, and while I think the Nittany Lions did get a great coach in Matt Campbell, just the way they went about getting it was pretty terrible. So if you think how that went, just imagine how it's going to go now when Campbell's off the board and most of the other candidates have either said no or have signed extensions or are at their new jobs. So as for Lincoln Riley with improving USC on the defensive side, I want to believe he can, but I'm just wondering. It's somehow a trend I've been noticing is if Lincoln Riley is going to do something drastic, he has to lose to Washington. 2023. No, I'll go a little further, actually. So I will admit, when Alex Grinch was announced that they announced Alex Grinch was coming back, I actually wanted to give Riley a chance because you know what? It was year one. They inherited a lot of players. So you know what? I was going to give Grinch the benefit of the doubt. You know what? They had a great year overall. Yeah, a couple losses. You said we were going to the Cotton Bowl. I'd be like, shut up. We're not going there. So I took that. I take that in a heartbeat. It's just hard to take it when you're that close to making the CFP. So Grinch comes back, and then everything falls apart. And by that point, I was like, yeah, they should have kept him. But now on to my thing about Washington. 2023, the loss to Washington, Lincoln Riley finally pulls the plug on Alex Grinch. 2024, USC loses to Washington, Seattle. Miller Moss gets benched. So, with the trend, 2026, Washington is coming back to the Coliseum. Will that finally be what gets Rob Ryan or someone on this defensive staff fired? Will it finally cause Lincoln Riley to make a drastic move? I hope it doesn't come to that, and I want to believe that this defense will be better. But it's hard for me to see that when you have an assistant like Rob Ryan on the staff. So that's why I'm wondering, is it going to take another loss to Washington for Lincoln Riley to finally realize that Rob Ryan needs to go? So that's my thoughts on that. But I've just very been much noticing a trend. And I've been pointing out to my buddy who went to UW, who I've gone to the last two games with, who also is took note of it. Because I remember both those times, I saw it and then I was texting him or showed him dude, look what you guys just made USC do.
And, Jed Fish and Washington, they are getting some serious early 2026 buzz with the recruits, with, the developmental process for that team. So Washington USC 2026 could be a defining game for the tenures of both coaches, Jed Fish in Seattle, Lincoln Riley at USC. Let me tackle these questions, Dependent Fanatic. For USC's defense, woof, woof. it's all about the dog work. Does Eric Henderson deliver a little bark and a lot of bite in 2026? That to me is the thing, because the USC needs a filthy McNasty defensive line. It's how the program rose to prominence under Pete Carroll. I go back to that 23-0 shutout of Auburn. Click, clack. We're coming into your crib. We're going down south to the SEC, and we're just plundering you. And we're just going to destroy you and leave nothing left on the field. It's all ours. And it began with the defensive line. USC needs to get back to that place. Oklahoma is in the playoff despite, frankly, a mediocre offense, because that defensive line did so much heavy lifting for Brent Venables. So that's the story. Woof, woof. USC needs to get back to the dog work, and especially against Washington, to kind of mix some metaphors there against the Huskies. And who should coach Michigan? See, I think I'm in the wilderness here. I don't think I'm in the majority. But John Harbaugh makes all the sense in the world for Michigan. The Ravens aren't going anywhere. Like that ship has sailed. He's been there for over a decade. It's gotten stale. They need a new elite offensive mind for Lamar to get him across the threshold to a Super Bowl. Like, if you're a Ravens fan, forget about the GM and the front office, but just if you're a Ravens fan, like, all right, how many times are we going to run it back with John Harbaugh? We need to give someone else a chance. It's kind of similar to where the Bills are with Sean McDermott. Like, no Chiefs in the playoffs. If the Bills can't cross the line this year, why would you bring back McDermott? So with Josh Allen. So similar with John Harbaugh and Lamar. And of course, the other thing is there's been a Michigan Ravens pipeline the past several years. Defensive coordinators, coaches, guys who coached it in one place would go to the other. So John Harbaugh, he's not necessarily a Michigan insider in the sense that he hasn't been coaching at Michigan all this time, but he essentially is an insider because he talked to Jim and they exchanged coaches. And he has none of the baggage that Jim has. Some people say, oh, you have to turn the page from the Harbaugh era. Well, it's the Jim Harbaugh era. It's not the John Harbaugh era. He had zero to do with any of the scandals and the cheating and any of the other things that you can associate with Michigan. John Harbaugh is his own guy, but he has the institutional knowledge. He can obviously call his brother, talk to his brother on the phone. So Michigan gets the expertise of a Harbaugh without the baggage of a Harbaugh because it's John. To me, that's the most obvious thing in the world. And of course, with the transfer portal moving back to January, the idea of hiring an NFL coach, you're not behind in the portal chase. The portal opens January 2nd. Week 18 of the NFL is January 4. You're not losing time the way you would have when the portal was in December. So there's not the lost time element of hiring an NFL coach that you would have had in a December portal environment. But now with the portal being in January, to me, John Harbaugh is the obvious choice for Michigan football. So thanks for Dependent Fanatic for your question. A little bit more on the other side, but first, here's a word from our sponsor. We will see you in a minute.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select a betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And of course, you can follow Mark Rogers' National Voice of College Football show 6 nights a week, Mondays through Saturdays, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in LA, and the rest of the West. So a reminder, go to vocfb.com/shop and get the caps, you get the t-shirts. There's also coffee mugs, tumblers. You can play around at the site, but vocfb.com/shop. Ethan modeling that very snappy USC camo cap. Proceeds for USC branded VOCFB apparel help support the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. And again, the USC YouTube channel, USC Voice of College Football. You can Google it. You go to the homepage, you click the join button at the top of the page. You join at the middle Heisman tier, the top national champion tier, get the bonus cuts, the fork and knife, tuck in, become a member, and we have a long 17-minute bonus segment with former USC quarterback and current football analyst Cody Kessler. That's for members only. All right, so final segment as we wind down the show, and bowl opt-outs. So, USC's roster, this is not a surprise, right? If you're not in a playoff game, the non-playoff bowl games get hit really hard by opt-outs. So the simple question for you, Ethan and Crash, is how much does this change how you're looking at the Alamo Bowl against TCU?
I don't think it changes that much for me, just because I think that I mean a strength of this USC team this year was depth, right? I mean, that's kind of what we talked about all year long, was when USC's top players went out, the backups really stepped up. Like King Miller is a great example of that. Some of the offensive linemen, a couple of players on the defensive side of the ball as well. So I think that, USC's identity doesn't change too much. I also think that, having Jaden Maiava back in this game is really interesting, because I mean, he was at bowl practice yesterday, so I would assume he is going to start this game. So, that's just another game for him to have under his belt, and for, him to have, with some of these other receivers as well, since Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane will not be playing. I think, this, and I'm talking about that in terms of winning and losing. I still expect USC to win. I think that they still have enough depth and enough skill all over the field that I expect them to go out and win. So my opinion on them winning or losing doesn't really change. I think that we've kind of come to a point in the era of college football that we're in that, like, bowl games are almost like a postseason preseason, as weird as it is to say that, because, like, I don't know, I think even last year, the Holiday Bowl in 2023, like, we really watch these bowl games to think about how next year is going to look. And so, I think that this is going to be a great opportunity for some of USC's younger players who have re-signed to kind of go out and prove themselves and, kind of make their case for a prominent spot on this 2026 roster. So, yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of what the bowl game was always going to be about. And I think that there will be plenty of excitement on the USC side of the football. With guys like I'm curious how Jaden Walker is going to play. I'm curious how some of these receivers are going to play. Is Wayman Jordan going to be back? That could be really interesting. So plenty of talent to watch still, and plenty of talent to kind of believe in terms of winning this football game as well.
I think I agree with what Ethan's saying, but I also think bowl games serve one other purpose. For I think that group of guys who just want to play one last game of college football. And I think that's honestly really cool to see. And that's been what's been cool, I think, especially when I interviewed Justin Diedich, when he talked about opting to play in the Holiday Bowl one last time. I think he said it's like you might not get to play football again. And I mean, he almost didn't. He had to go the undrafted free agent route to get shot with the Rams. And then Jonah Monheim, Kyle Ford are other guys in the Vegas Bowl who come to mind. So really, I kind of like it. Honestly, they're those guys who just genuinely just want to play one last game of football. If they aren't either just because they cared so much about USC and what it meant to them, or they're just not sure that they're going to be able to achieve their NFL dreams. But then also, like Ethan said, I think it's a great opportunity to showcase the younger guys. And I mean, what you can argue is a glorified preseason / glorified exhibition game, I guess you could say. Is I'm not trying to downplay, because I think, honestly, there is still something special about the bowl games, even if they are losing their significance. And if we learned anything, I think that's just been pretty clear over the last that they have lost a lot of significance and relevance. But I think they still are important in the regards of just sending off the outgoing players in the right way, and then also prepping for next year and really getting to get some early looks at guys who are going to either have to step into bigger roles or guys who are going to probably have to get starting reps. So for those two reasons, I think it's still USC should win, but I'm excited to see them do it with a bit of a different roster that's going to probably more closely resemble what we will likely see in 2026.
Well, I would like to say that, that I'm still really excited and fired up for the Alabama Bowl, but I got to tell you, I can't look at this level of roster attrition and say, oh gosh, like I just absolutely can't wait for this. Part of this is also the opponent. If this was BYU, I would still be really interested because, okay, USC's backups going up against an 11-2 team, but I'm sorry, TCU just does not move the needle, and like that's what happens when you go to the Alamo Bowl. That you might just get a mid-tier opponent, and that's just the reality of what it is. And part of the bowls that I don't really like are these conference tie-ins. I think that these should just be national matchups. Mark Rogers had a really interesting idea last week when I joined him on the Monday night show. So this was 8 days ago. He said, LSU and Michigan. He used that as an example. LSU and Michigan have hardly, if ever, played. Like, they should play in a bowl game if there's a chance. Like, you do like historical matchups, sexy matchups. Like, you just put the two most attractive teams you can in a game, and you could have kind of a tiered system where, like, the Citrus, which does have Michigan, Texas. That's a decent game, but you get the point that the non-playoff bowls at the higher end of the spectrum would get first pick, second pick, and so on. But like, instead of just saying SEC number 4 versus Big Ten number 3, let's just do the best matchups possible across the whole board. And for the Potato Bowl, like, you don't have to confine yourself to Washington State versus Utah State. Just get the two best teams you can, and maybe have like a lottery or a rotation system. That would be one way to spice up the bowls. But anyway, TCU just doesn't do it for me. And I can only speak for myself. I'm not going to speak for anyone else. All right.
Matt, I would like to add in real quick about that. I do like that idea. And honestly, I know like the Pac-12's kind of current agreement with the bowls that it was previously affiliated that the legacy schools are currently like have their tie-ins with, I think ends after this year. I think especially the new CFP contract, maybe once that gets finalized, whether it stays at 12 or goes to 16, as the SEC and Big Ten figure out format of that. Who knows if they'll ever agree. But I do like that idea. And I think honestly, they should be listening to you right now, because that's a great idea that I think would generate so much more interest. So it's honestly a good idea. Like, anyone who's involved with bowls, tune into this episode and get Matt Zimick to flesh out his ideas in more depth for you. It's a great idea. I think can make the bowl season a lot more entertaining. So, Matt, I think that was a great idea. Just had to highlight it. And I think that honestly, if they play their cards right, I could see that possibly even getting implemented as soon as next year if everything goes right, which, it being college football, unfortunately probably won't.
You're very kind, Crash. Thank you. Just want to be clear. That idea belonged to Mark Rogers, but I was able to pick it up because I was co-hosting a Monday night national show with him. But like, I agree with it. Like, I was instantly won over by Mark Rogers, the godfather of the voice of college football. So, folks, housekeeping. We are going to have a show next week. Next week is the 23rd, so I know it's the Christmas rush. But Ethan and I talked, and Ethan said he's good. So, we are going to have a show next week. So while you're wrapping presents, listen to some USC football talk. We'll do a little bit on the Alamo Bowl, but also, the continued re-signings, portal exits. We'll chop up the playoff a little bit with, Oregon going up against future UCLA coach Bob Chesney. That's definitely going to be an item of interest, how we processed that game. So there's going to be a little bit of something for everyone under the tree next Tuesday, December 23rd. So we will do that show. And we might as well just say this as well. The Alamo Bowl is on a Tuesday. So we're not going to air at our normal slot, but we are aiming at a live post-game show. Right after the game ends. Now maybe our plans could change because it's the holidays and things can happen. But right now, that is our plan, to do a live post-game show right after the end of the Alamo Bowl on Tuesday, because Wednesday is going to be New Year's Eve, and you're going to want to be attending a party, or if you're just a diehard college football fan, you're going to watch the Cotton Bowl, the first of the four sensational playoff quarterfinals lined up. So we're going to get our show out of the way for you Tuesday night so that you can just enjoy your New Year's celebrations going into 2026. So regular show next Tuesday, wrap your presents, watch us, and then a week later, live post-game show right after the end of the Alamo Bowl to round things out for 2025 here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. For Ethan Inman and Crashlet Collier, this is Matt Zemek. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week, December 23rd. Fight on, everybody.